Some men build empires so tall, they forget how small their hearts have become. Ethan Cole stood 30 stories above Manhattan, staring through the glass wall of his office as the city moved without him. Yellow cabs slid through traffic like clockwork. People crossed streets with purpose. Everyone seemed to be going somewhere that mattered. He was not. Not really. His reflection looked back at him in the glass. Perfect suit. Immaculate posture. A man who had everything under control. And yet, nothing inside him felt steady. His assistant's voice broke the silence from behind. Another dinner invitation. Another woman. Another name he wouldn't remember by the end of the week. He didn't turn around. "Decline it," he said. His voice was calm, detached, practiced. There was no hesitation anymore. There hadn't been for years. The assistant paused, as if expecting a different answer this time. There never was. The door closed softly. Ethan remained still. He had lost count of how many invitations he had refused, how many conversations he had ended before they began. It was not arrogance. Not exactly. It was exhaustion. He had learned early that interest came with expectation, and expectation always came with disappointment. So he removed the middle step. He didn't allow interest to exist. His phone buzzed on the desk. A message from his board. Numbers. Growth projections. Expansion into rural territories. Another project. Bigger. Faster. More profitable. He walked back to the desk and glanced at the screen. The numbers were impressive. They always were. He approved them without sitting down. His signature came easily. It always had. That was the problem. Everything in his life came easily except the one thing he never tried to understand. Connection. He loosened his tie slightly, something no one ever saw him do. Not in meetings. Not in public. Only here. Alone. His penthouse that night felt no different from his office. Clean lines. Expensive silence. He poured himself a glass of water and stood by the window again. The city lights stretched for miles. Beautiful. Untouchable. Just like him. His phone lit up again. This time it was not a board member. It was a notification from his foundation. A small rural outreach program he barely remembered approving. A charity event. Attendance requested. He almost dismissed it. Almost. But something about the image attached made him pause. A woman stood in a modest outdoor space, handing a plate of food to a child. No cameras. No staging. Just a moment captured without intention. Her clothes were simple. Her posture relaxed. But her eyes, they were focused, present, alive in a way he hadn't seen in a long time. Ethan stared at the screen longer than he expected. Then he locked his phone and set it down. He told himself it meant nothing. Just another obligation. Another appearance. Another box to check. But for reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't decline this one. The next morning, his driver waited as usual. The car door opened. The schedule was already planned. Meetings. Calls. Decisions that would shape lives he would never see. Ethan stepped in, then paused. "Change of plans," he said. The driver glanced back, surprised but silent. Ethan gave him the address from the notification. The car pulled away from the familiar skyline, moving toward something quieter. Something smaller. Ethan leaned back into the seat, his expression unreadable. He didn't know what he expected to find there. He only knew one thing. For the first time in years, he hadn't chosen control. He had chosen curiosity. Ethan arrived at the event, the small community center, feeling like a stark contrast to the towering skyscrapers of his office. It wasn't his world. His shoes clicked softly against the worn wooden floors as he walked inside, surrounded by people who weren't afraid to smile, to laugh, to share their lives. He felt out of place in his pristine suit, a suit that had been tailor-made for board meetings, not for charity events like this. His eyes swept the room. He was here, but he wasn't really present. Not yet. The woman from the image appeared in front of him. Her eyes were the same sharp kind, full of something he couldn't place. She wore no makeup, just a simple dress that seemed to breathe in the room. A modest choice that somehow felt more elegant than anything he had ever worn. Her name was Clara. "You're here," she said, as if the idea of him attending was both a surprise and a gift. Ethan nodded, unsure of what else to say. I didn't think I'd be here either. She smiled. It wasn't the tight smile he saw from women at galas, filled with pretense and expectation. This was real. It made him feel vulnerable. Clara led him through the event, showing him the modest booths, the tables with children's artwork displayed proudly, the community members who greeted him with genuine warmth. His discomfort grew with every smile, every simple conversation. He wasn't used to it. People didn't usually approach him like this. No hidden agendas, no schemes, just kindness. Do you always help like this? Ethan asked, his voice quieter than usual, unsure if he wanted an answer. Clara paused, glancing at a few children who ran past, laughing. I do what I can. Everyone here does, she said. No one's waiting for a thank you. We just try to make life a little easier for those who don't have it all. He watched her, the way she spoke to others with warmth, how she genuinely cared. It was a language he didn't know. He didn't understand it. Yet something inside him was beginning to shift. He had spent so many years making decisions with calculations, with the cold logic of business. But here nothing seemed to make sense. There was no formula, no clear path to success. Just people offering their time, their hearts, with nothing expected in return. Ethan turned toward her as she continued to greet guests. Her presence felt like a light in the room. She was different, grounded in a way that was foreign to him. You're different from anyone I've met, he admitted quietly, his words coming faster than he intended. She didn't look at him right away. Instead, she smiled softly, as if she'd been waiting for him to say it. I'm not looking to change you, Ethan, but maybe, just maybe, you're ready to change yourself. His heart caught in his chest. The vulnerability that he'd locked away for so long was suddenly at the surface, threatening to spill over. He could feel it, the urge to step into the light, to embrace something real, something that wasn't about control or numbers or strategy. He swallowed hard. I think I might be, he said, his voice rough. Clara's eyes softened. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel the need to guard his heart. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about keeping control at all. Maybe it was about letting go. Ethan had never been one to believe in fate. He had built his empire on logic, on hard work, and unyielding control. There was a certain order to things, a strategy that had always worked for him. Yet, as he stood across the room from Clara, everything he thought he knew about life, about love, seemed to be slipping away. Clara, the single mother who had caught his attention with nothing more than a smile, was nothing like the women he had encountered in his high-powered circles. She wasn't polished or guarded. She didn't wear expensive dresses or smile with the expectation of something in return. She was real, raw, and incredibly grounded, and for some reason that made her stand out in a way no one ever had before. Do you think it's possible to start over? He asked, his voice low, almost as if he was speaking to himself. Clara looked up at him, her brow furrowing in thought. Start over, she repeated softly. You can't always start over, Ethan. But you can change. You can choose to be different. Sometimes that's all it takes. Her words hit him like a wave, crashing against the walls he had so carefully built around himself. He had never considered change as an option. Life to him was about staying ahead, staying on top, and keeping everything under control. But in Clara's eyes, he saw something different. She wasn't asking him to give up his empire, to throw away everything he had worked for. She was offering him something more subtle, more profound. She was asking him to let go of the weight of his own expectations, to open himself to a different possibility. He stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat. I've spent so much of my life trying to make everything perfect, he confessed, his voice quieter now. But I don't know what perfect really is anymore. Clara's gaze softened as she took a step forward, her presence like a quiet reassurance in the midst of the chaos inside him. Perfect isn't about having it all figured out, Ethan, she said, her voice calm but steady. It's about embracing the mess, the imperfections, and learning to trust that you don't have to have everything under control to be happy. Ethan felt the walls inside him crumbling piece by piece. He had always prided himself on his ability to control every aspect of his life, but Clara was showing him that there was a different kind of strength, one that came from letting go. He reached out, almost instinctively, his hand brushing against hers. It wasn't much, but it was enough to send a shiver through his body. A reminder that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't meant to walk this path alone. "I think I'm ready for that," he murmured, his eyes locking with hers. "To let go." Clara smiled softly, her eyes shining with an understanding that went beyond words. "It's a start," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "And sometimes that's all you need." In that moment, Ethan realized that the next chapter of his life wasn't about finding the perfect plan, but about embracing the uncertainty and trusting someone else enough to take the next step with them. And Clara was the one person who had shown him how to take that first step into a future he never imagined. The event ended long after the sun had disappeared. But Ethan didn't leave when everyone else did. The lights inside the community center dimmed one by one. Chairs were folded, tables cleared. The quiet returned to the space like a familiar friend. Clara moved through the room with steady hands, collecting what was left behind, her energy calm but clearly tired. Ethan watched her from across the room, unsure why he had stayed. He had never stayed anywhere longer than necessary. Not in meetings. Not in conversations. Not in people's lives. Yet here he was, standing in a place that had nothing to offer him in terms of business or advantage, and still he didn't want to walk away. "You don't have to help," Clara said gently without looking up, as if she had felt his presence lingering. Ethan hesitated, then reached for a stack of folded chairs anyway. "Maybe I want to," he replied. The words sounded unfamiliar even to him. Clara glanced at him briefly, a quiet curiosity in her eyes. But she didn't question it. They worked side by side in silence for a few minutes. The rhythm was simple. Lift, carry, stack. For once there were no decisions to calculate, no outcomes to predict. Just action. Just presence. When the last chair was set aside, Clara leaned lightly against the table, exhaling a slow breath. "This is the part people don't see," she said. Ethan set his hands on the edge of the table, mirroring her stance. "What part is that?" he asked. Clara looked around the empty room. "The part where it isn't inspiring. Not meaningful in a big way. Just work that still needs to be done." Ethan followed her gaze. He had spent his life chasing big moments. Announcements. Deals. Numbers that made headlines. He had never paid attention to the quiet work that held everything together. "And you still show up for it," he said. Clara nodded. "Because it matters," she answered simply. There was no performance in her voice. No need to prove anything. Just truth. Ethan felt something shift again, deeper this time. He had always believed that value came from scale. From how much something could grow, how far it could reach. But here, in this quiet space, he saw a different kind of value. One that didn't need to be measured to exist. Clara picked up a small box and began organizing leftover supplies. Ethan watched her hands. Careful. Intentional. Present in every movement. "Why do you do all of this?" he asked. Clara paused for a moment, then looked at him. "Because I know what it feels like to have nothing," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried weight. "And I promised myself that if I ever had enough to share, even a little, I wouldn't look away." Ethan held her gaze, and for the first time he didn't feel like the most powerful person in the room. He felt like the one who had been missing something all along. "And do you've enough?" he asked quietly. Clara smiled, not because the answer was easy, but because it was honest. "Some days I do," she said. "Some days I do not. But I show up anyway." The simplicity of her answer stayed with him. He had built a life where he only showed up when he was certain of the outcome, where risk was calculated and loss was minimized. Clara lived in a world where certainty didn't exist, yet she chose to give anyway. Ethan straightened slightly, his voice more grounded than before. "I think I've been showing up for the wrong things," he admitted. Clara studied him, not with judgment, but with quiet understanding. "Then maybe it's time to choose something different," she said. The words were not dramatic. They didn't need to be. Ethan nodded slowly. For the first time, the idea of change didn't feel like a threat to his identity. Felt like a possibility. Clara reached for her bag, preparing to leave. "It is late," she said. "You should get back." Ethan glanced toward the door, then back at her. "I will," he said. But he didn't move right away. Instead, he walked with her to the exit, stepping out into the cool night air together. The street was quiet. No flashing lights. No waiting drivers. Just a simple road stretching into the distance. Clara adjusted the strap on her shoulder and turned slightly toward him. "Good night, Ethan," she said. He hesitated for half a second, then replied, "Good night, Clara." She started to walk away, her steps steady, unhurried. Ethan watched her go, something unfamiliar settling in his chest. It was not control. It was not certainty. It was something quieter. Something real. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't rush to leave it behind. Ethan stared at his phone, the message from his assistant blinking at the top of his screen. "Meeting at 3 p.m. tomorrow. You're expected at the office." He scrolled through his schedule quickly, and for the first time in years he hesitated. He had worked relentlessly to build the empire that surrounded him. Numbers, contracts, acquisitions, but tonight, there was no rush to get home to it. His office, his decisions, all of it had never felt so distant. Clara's words echoed in his mind. "Some days I do, some days I don't. But I show up anyway." That had been days ago. But those words resonated deep within him now like a quiet storm. He had been running, chasing something intangible, thinking it was what mattered. But was it really? The weight of it all pressed on him in a way he had never felt before. He stood and walked toward the window of his penthouse. Below him the city stretched out vast and endless. People rushed through their lives. Busy, purposeful. But for the first time he felt disconnected from it all. His success, his accomplishments, what did they mean if they couldn't bring him a moment of peace? Ethan pulled on his jacket, then picked up his keys. He needed to get out. Just for a while. Without a plan. Without a purpose. He found himself driving through the city, the hum of the car engine the only sound accompanying his thoughts. He wasn't sure where he was going. He just knew he needed to be away from his usual world. The world that expected so much, yet never seemed to give back what he truly needed. When he arrived at the community center where Clara had been volunteering, it was quiet. The lights were dimmed. The evening had settled into a peaceful lull. Clara was finishing up her shift, folding chairs, organizing the leftover supplies. She looked up when she saw him standing at the door, her face softening in surprise but not in a way that seemed startled. "Just noticing. You're still here," she said gently. "I couldn't stay away," he replied, walking toward her. His words sounded foreign to him, but for once they felt true. Clara gave a small smile, but she didn't ask him why. She had no need to. She already understood, perhaps more than anyone else ever had. "You're welcome to stay and help," she said, her voice low and calm. Ethan paused. It had been a long time since he had allowed himself to do something without expecting a return. Without considering what he could gain or what it meant for his reputation. There was no ambition in this, no grand outcome. It was simply doing something because it mattered, even in a small way. He bent down to help her organize the last of the chairs, and for a moment, it felt like the weight of the world had lessened. It wasn't just the chairs or the quiet hum of the space that felt lighter. It was something deeper. The act of simply being there with no agenda, no need to impress or achieve, was like stepping into a world that wasn't demanding anything from him. After they finished, Clara turned to him, wiping her hands on a rag, and met his gaze. "It's always like this," she said softly. "No applause, no recognition. But it's enough for me." Ethan looked at her, feeling something stir inside him, something unfamiliar yet undeniable. She wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't waiting for him to change or fix things. She was simply content. And in that moment he realized how little he had known about what it meant to truly live, to show up without expecting something in return. "I think," he said, voice steady but uncertain, "I've been searching for the wrong things." Clara tilted her head slightly, but there was no judgment in her eyes. "Maybe you just needed to stop looking." The simplicity of it hit him harder than any business deal ever had. He had been running for so long, accumulating power, wealth, achievements, but in the end, none of it had brought him the peace he felt here, in this quiet moment with Clara. "Maybe I do," he whispered, finally understanding what she meant. It wasn't about what he could take from the world. It was about what he could give. Without expectation. Without need. He stood there, in the quiet of the community center, and for the first time, felt what it was like to truly belong. To just be. Ethan sat at the small cafe, his eyes tracing the steady stream of customers moving in and out. But his mind was elsewhere. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about Clara since he left the community center. The conversation they shared lingered with him like a soft melody, comforting and disarming. She hadn't asked for anything. She hadn't pushed him to change. She had simply been herself, genuine, warm, unguarded. And it had left an indelible mark on him. The world he had built felt distant now. The luxury of his penthouse, the gleaming cars, the endless meetings and contracts, none of it seemed as important as it once had. He had spent so much of his life fighting for success, thinking that it would fill the emptiness inside him. But sitting in this quiet cafe, he realized it wasn't the success or wealth that mattered. It was the moments of quiet connection, like the one he'd shared with Clara. He was snapped from his thoughts as the door opened and Clara stepped in, her presence unmistakable. She looked like she had just finished a long day of work, yet there was a certain ease to her movements, a grace that made her glow even in the most ordinary moments. As soon as she saw him, she smiled, her eyes lighting up in recognition. "You found the time to escape the office, huh?" Clara teased, sliding into the seat opposite him. Ethan chuckled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. "I needed a break from the hustle," he said, his voice steady, but softer than usual. Clara raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "A billionaire CEO taking a break? Are you sure you're not just running away from your responsibilities?" He smiled at her playfully, his thoughts drifting to the weight of his position in the business world. "Maybe," he replied, "but I think it's more about finding what I've been missing." Clara paused, her gaze intense, as if she could see through the walls he had built around himself. "And what's that?" "I don't know yet," Ethan admitted, the vulnerability in his voice surprising him. "But I feel like it's something I can't find in boardrooms or conferences." Clara's expression softened, her eyes filled with understanding. "You're starting to see, aren't you?" she said quietly. "It's not about success or wealth. It's about living a life that means something." Ethan leaned back, her words settling in. For the first time in years he felt something shift inside him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew this moment with Clara, this simplicity, was something real, something worth pursuing. "I've been chasing the wrong things," he said slowly, almost to himself. "But with you, I think I might be starting to understand." Clara reached across the table, her hand brushing against his. A small but significant gesture. "It's not about understanding everything all at once," she said softly. "Sometimes it's just about being present and taking it one day at a time." Ethan looked at her, feeling a warmth spread through him. The rush of the corporate world, the deadlines, the deals, none of it seemed as important anymore. All that mattered was the quiet connection they shared. "I think I'm ready to take that step," he whispered, the weight of the decision feeling like a burden lifted. For the first time in his life, he wasn't looking for answers from business deals or wealth. He was looking for something deeper. A connection that went beyond anything he had ever known. And for the first time he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The moment didn't break all at once. It unraveled slowly, like a thread pulled too tight for too long. Ethan returned to his office the next morning, the glass walls no longer reflecting power but distance. His assistant greeted him with the same efficiency, the same expectation that he would step back into the role he had never questioned. Meetings were lined up. Contracts waited for his approval. A new expansion plan sat at the top of the agenda, highlighted in bold. He took his seat at the head of the conference table, surrounded by executives who spoke in numbers and projections, their voices confident, certain. This was his world. It always had been. But something inside him refused to settle back into it. "The rural acquisition will increase profit margins by 18% within the first year," one of them said, pointing to a digital map on the screen. Ethan's eyes moved to the image. The location was familiar. Too familiar. It was the same community Clara had shown him. The same place where people knew each other's names, where small acts mattered more than large outcomes. "We can begin relocation within 60 days, another voice added. Ethan felt his jaw tighten slightly. He had approved projects like this without hesitation before. It was business. It was growth. It was expected. But now the thought of it felt different. Personal. "What happens to the people living there?" he asked. The room paused, not because the answer was unclear, but because the question itself was unexpected. They will be compensated, someone replied quickly. Standard procedure. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady but distant. Standard procedure. He had used that phrase himself countless times. It made things easier, cleaner, less human. He ended the meeting early. No explanation. Just a quiet decision that left the room unsettled. By the afternoon, he was no longer in the office. He was driving again without a clear plan, until the city faded and something quieter took its place. When he arrived, Clara was outside, sitting on a low wooden bench, helping a child tie a loose shoelace. She looked up when she saw him, surprise flickering across her face before settling into something more cautious. Ethan stopped a few feet away. This time there was no hesitation in his voice. I need to ask you something, he said. Clara stood slowly, brushing her hands together. That sounds serious, she replied gently. Ethan nodded. If someone offered you something better, he said, choosing his words carefully. More money, more comfort. But it meant leaving this place behind. Would you take it? Clara didn't answer right away. She glanced around at the small homes, the children playing nearby, the quiet life she had built piece by piece. Then she looked back at him. Better for who? She asked. Ethan felt the question settle heavily between them. For you, he said. Clara shook her head slightly. Then it isn't that simple, she replied. Her voice was calm, but firm. A life isn't better just because it's easier. It's better when it still feels like yours. Ethan let out a slow breath, the tension in his chest tightening before it eased. And if someone tried to take that choice away? He asked. Clara's eyes softened, but there was strength in them now. Then I would fight to keep it, she said. The answer was quiet, but it carried more certainty than anything he had heard all day. Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, and realized the truth he had been avoiding. This was not just a decision about business. It was a decision about who he was willing to become. I approved something I shouldn't have, he admitted. Clara didn't step back. She didn't react with anger. She simply listened. Then maybe the question isn't what you approved, she said, but what you're going to do now. The wind moved gently between them, carrying the weight of what came next. Ethan nodded once. Not as a CEO. Not as a man used to control. But as someone finally ready to face the consequences of his own choices. And for the first time he understood that change was not proven by words. It was proven by what you were willing to risk to make things right. Ethan spent the next few days reflecting on Clara's words, trying to make sense of the confusion swirling in his mind. The weight of his decision sat heavy on his shoulders, and for the first time in years, he was no longer sure about the path he had chosen. His business empire, built on ambition and success, now felt hollow, tainted by his own actions. He stood at the top of the glass skyscraper, looking out at the city below, but the view no longer gave him the sense of power it once did. He could see the skyline that symbolized everything he had worked for, but the longer he stared, the more he felt disconnected. It was as if the world was moving in one direction. He was being pulled in another. He thought about Clara, her honesty, her strength, the life she had chosen, one built on love, community, and simplicity. It was a stark contrast to the life he had led, a life that, for all its wealth and accomplishments, had never truly made him feel whole. He couldn't stop thinking about her and the child she cared for. Clara had shown him a different way of living, one that didn't revolve around numbers, profits, or deadlines. She had opened his eyes to the importance of connection and purpose. The truth was he had always been alone, surrounded by people who only cared about his success, not the man beneath the surface. He had everything but nothing at the same time. The next afternoon he made a decision. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that he needed to make a change. He needed to do something that felt right, not just for the business, but for him. He picked up the phone and dialed Clara's number. His heart raced as it rang, each second feeling like a lifetime. Hello. Her voice was as warm as he remembered, grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in years. Clara, it's Ethan, he said, his voice steady but with an edge of uncertainty. I want to make things right. I want to help. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I want to find a way to support this community. I want to change how I do business. I don't want to be the man I was anymore. There was a long pause, and for a moment Ethan feared she might hang up. But then he heard her soft exhale, a sound of relief and acceptance. Ethan, she began, her voice gentle but firm, you don't have to fix everything in one go. Change takes time. But you've taken the first step. And that's what matters. He could hear the sincerity in her words, and in that moment, he realized that this was the start of something bigger than himself. This was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where he would no longer chase hollow victories, but instead work towards creating something meaningful. I'm ready, Clara, he said, his words filled with newfound determination. I'm ready to start over. The phone call ended, and as Ethan stood by the window looking out at the city once more, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time he felt hopeful. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but he was no longer afraid to take the first step. Ethan stood at the edge of the community center, feeling the weight of the decision that had brought him here. The towering buildings of the city loomed in the distance, reminders of the life he had built. But here, among the people he had once overlooked, he felt a shift. He had spent years chasing after something that now felt hollow. Yet, looking at the faces around him, he realized that real success wasn't in skyscrapers or bank balances. It was in the connections he had ignored for so long. Clara stood next to him, her presence grounding him. She had become the bridge between the life he had lived and the life he could have. He watched as she spoke with a mother, gently reassuring her about a community project. Her voice, calm yet filled with warmth, was the opposite of the cutthroat world Ethan had come from. I never thought I'd be here, Ethan said softly, his eyes following Clara as she moved through the crowd. I never thought I could care about this. About people. Clara glanced at him, offering a small, knowing smile. You've always had it in you, Ethan. You just needed to see it. He nodded, still processing the enormity of his transformation. The man who had once been driven by ambition alone was now standing in a place where the goal wasn't to climb higher, but to lift others up. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the crowd, Ethan knew this was where he belonged now. His heart no longer raced for meetings or deadlines. It was beating for moments like these, the small but meaningful connections with people who cared for something greater than themselves. Clara, he said, turning to her, thank you for showing me that it's never too late to change. She placed a hand on his arm, a reassuring gesture. You've always had the power to choose, Ethan. You just had to realize it. The two of them stood there in silence, watching the families gathered in the community center, sharing stories and laughter. It was a moment of peace, a stark contrast to the chaos he had once thrived in. Ethan knew that this wasn't just a chapter of his life. It was the beginning of a new story, one where love, kindness, and community would always come first. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan found himself thinking about the future. Not the one he had imagined years ago, but a new one. The possibilities were endless, and for the first time in a long time he felt truly free.